The whole session would not be complete without hearing from St Nicholas Trust family support workers who sit on my left, Lisa McCarthy and Laura McDonnell, who are going to address us next on their experiences with this issue.
When we think of crime, we think of victims and their families. We sympathise with them with their pain and the suffering they have as a result of the crime. When the perpetrators are caught and sent to jail, those victims and their families hopefully get some kind of closure. However, as we all know here, the consequences of crime can be far-reaching. Among these consequences of the families of offenders, these family members are parents, spouses, partners, grandparents, brothers and sisters, and most especially children. They've done nothing wrong, but yet they experience feelings of fear, despair, isolation, shame, anger, and most important, stigma that goes along with being associated with the crime or with having someone in prison. I can vouch for all that because, unfortunately, I have been a victim of crime, although a crime has never been committed against me. My husband at the time, but now ex-husband, went to prison, and I found myself in a very, very difficult place. I had nowhere to turn to back in 2006. I had great family support, great support from friends, great support from work colleagues, but I had nobody who understood what I was going through and how I felt. And I was alone. I had never been involved with the guards. The only time I was in the guard station was to get my passport form signed. And now I thought, like, oh my God, anybody that goes to prison, they're really, really horrible people. They come from bad families. They're this, they're that. I had what society perceived them as, but that's not the truth. I mean, I've met some people now, Laura, other Murray, people that have become my friends that I would never have known, only for what I had unfortunately to go through. This happened in 2006. Fast forward to 2008, 14 months later, and my husband was, he got a prison sentence. As I said, I had nowhere to turn to, but for some reason, Maureen's name kept coming up, and I got in contact with her, and along with Laura, Colin O'Hurley, who was the principal of Cork Prison, the school in Cork Prison at the time, Catherine Coakley, who was the vice principal. We kind of recognised there was a need for somewhere for people to go to. It was in response for relatives who sought information in loads of different places but weren't getting the answers that they wanted. So we set up this group called St Nicholas Trust. Most of the people that come to St Nicholas Trust are families of first-time offenders who've never had any dealings with law or with the guards or anything before. So they come to us for help. We used to meet every fortnight in the probation office in Coke Street, and it was just somewhere where people could just vent, somewhere where you could listen to other people's experiences and realize you're not alone. There's other people. It can be anybody in the morning. You never know what's going to knock on your door next. So St Nicholas Trust gave me great strength, and as a person I really grew. I understood what other people were going through, and in turn I can give this help to people who are going through the same experience as me. I'll talk about my kids now before I go about some more about St Nicholas Trust. When everything happened back in 2006, my children were 5 and 6 months old. My husband went to work. I got a knock on the door. Didn't know who it was. 3 men at the door. One looked like he had a GAA jacket on, and I was thinking to myself, oh my God, they're looking for sponsorship at this time of night. And I was like, going to get out a fiver and write my name on the card or whatever, until they told me they were the Gardaí and my husband had been arrested. They came in. Luckily my children were in bed. My whole life collapsed, absolutely collapsed. Then, as I said, 14 months later, my husband went into prison. I had 2 kids who were now 7 and 2. What do I do? Do I tell them that their father is in prison, or do I not tell them? It's an extremely difficult position to be in because you don't know what's right and what's wrong. In a way, you're kind of playing God, because do you lie to them or do you tell them the truth? Because my children were so young, I decided not to tell them. So then you're living with what if they find out from their friends in school, or they table talk. A lot of children hear table talk and go out and hear what they hear on the street. But I was lucky enough that didn't happen. I didn't tell them and made up a story. Daddy's away working. Never said where he was working. They never asked where he was working. but I became father and mother, and I overcompensated for their loss by, I got a trampoline, Daddy sent over his wages, there's a trampoline at the back, Daddy sent Easter eggs, I posted cards, and they got posted, just to normalise things for them. At the end of the day, I didn't want to bring my kids into a prison. I felt guilty as a parent doing that. I visited Cork Prison, and for those that work within the prison service, I'm sorry to say that it's not right to bring children into what we have now. You go into Cork Prison, I know there's a new prison being built, which is fantastic, and hopefully the services there will be way better than what we already have. When you go into Cork Prison to visit, you're going through a security system. As an adult, that's okay, you understand what's going on. As a child, they're standing there, they've got to run the sniffer dog, they've got to be checked. In my opinion, it's not right. Then you go in and there's perspex that they have to lean over and speak. And how do you tell a 2-year-old you can't kiss your dad? It's a violation of their human rights. So as I said, I decided not to do that. My 5-year-old was able to speak to his father every day on the phone, because you do get a 6-minute phone call. So I kind of thought that was his bond. They still had that. They could talk about Liverpool football team, which they love, or whatever. But my 2-year-old at the time wasn't speaking, so I would be very proactive in doing things. So I decided to go up and visit the Midlands prison to see if I thought I would bring a child in there. The facilities up there, to be fair, are a lot better than what's in Cork Prison. So my husband asked for a transfer. He went up there, and I brought my younger child in. The guilt that I felt bringing a child into prison is unbelievable, because why should I do that to a child, but at the same time, why should I not allow him to have contact with his father? But then it becomes normal. It becomes a normal part of your life, and you just carry on with it. So eventually, 14 months down the line, he was transferred to Shelton Abbey. And although it was a 3-hour journey up, 3-hour journey down, we did it nearly every Saturday. And they hadn't seen each other in 14 months. It was Easter Sunday. I had Easter eggs in the back of the car, pretending that they're from Daddy, and brought a football because there's lovely green up there. And they played football. They just hugged each other as if they'd only seen each other yesterday. So whatever I did do, and the positive way I was speaking about him, it didn't impact on them negatively, I don't feel. But there's an awful lot more that we can do. Like, as I said, with St. Nicholas Trust, I've been part of a European project along with Sandy, and we visited prisons in other countries. In the Walls, they have a fabulous service where there is, as you, like McDonald's, you sit down on chairs and you can go get something to drink, and parents can interact with their children. It's not perfect, but it's a lot better than what we have here. We really need to look at what other countries are doing and try to emulate them. You mentioned Belgium. They've got much the same system in Copenhagen, where they start in the open services, and if you do wrong, then you work your way down. But when in those, families aren't being victimized, because at least they're getting more support at the start. If the person then doesn't do what they're supposed to do and they go to a more secure prison, at least the family has had the opportunity to go and visit their mother, father, whatever. But we do need to do an awful lot more here. Like, I remember when my son was making his communion, I really wanted his father to be there at the end of the day for his communion. I wrote letters and letters and letters. I rang here, I rang there, and he was allowed out. And even for my son to have that, it was absolutely huge. And looking back on pictures, that I can say he was there. As a society, I know what, in theory, all what you're saying sounds perfect, and we have a long way to go. But nobody ever asked me, how did I feel? What about my children? What were they going through? How do they feel? It's all great, but there's a long, long way to go. And again, you mentioned what I would be very, very fearful of. It's generational reoffending. That 6 out of 10 children of offenders go on to reoffend. I have to cling to the hope that 4 out of 10 children don't reoffend. Community follow-up, I heard that be mentioned. No one has ever asked me how are my children, because I think because it was a first-time offence, that if you have, we say, if there's an issue with drugs or there's an issue with crime in the family and services outside services are involved, then a lot more help is there. But I don't mean to sound horrible, but for ordinary families, it's when they're sentenced, they go and lock the gate. That's the end of it, and there's no more until they come out, in my experience. Another thing I will say is that I don't know if I made the right decision. I battled every day, not every day, but a lot of the time, with was I right to not tell them? Should I have told them? Children are resilient. If my children were older and they were, we say, of an age where they could read newspapers or they knew what was going on, personally I would have told them. But if I had my time over again and my children, I won't talk hopefully, but if I did and my children were that young, I think as a mother I wouldn't put them through the experience, not in Ireland anyway, because it's not fair. So.
Like Lisa, I had never any dealings with crime, prisons, guards, anything until 2008 when my partner was sentenced to 3 years in prison. At the time, our daughter was 10 months old, and the only way I can describe it, it was like a death. I think, in fact, actually, it would have been easier if he had died, because then I wouldn't have been left with the trauma of how am I going to tell my child now, or how am I going to deal with this. So I was left with a choice: do I bring her to the prison? It's 3 years. They have to bond. It's very important for parents and children to bond. How is she going to bond when I'm in prison? If I don't bring her, am I going to ruin that bond that they have already made? So I decided to bring her with me to the prison to see her dad. It was the hardest thing I've ever had to do, and I think that I will ever have to do in my life. I still now, 5 years on, live with the guilt of ever bringing my child into such a traumatic, disastrous place. But I did so that she would eventually know who her father was when he did come home. The visiting regime is strict, and I completely agree with this, because things happen in prison. People do try to bring in drugs into prison, and that's the reality of it. So you go through, as mentioned earlier, you go through like the airport system, then you go to a sniffer dog, which was fine when she was 10 months because she thought the dog was lovely and that was all grand, and and she was going in to see Dada, and it was fine. But as time goes on, there is no contact in Cork prison. So as time goes on, she's trying to get over to Dad. She's putting hands over and Dad can't do anything. I'm getting extremely frustrated because Dad sits like this at this side of the counter not doing anything, and I'm the one who has to try and keep her back and hold her back, and you're still trying to relay all the daily information and everything that goes on in my life and things that are going on with Lauren as she's growing up, and it's extremely hard. He saw all the milestones that parents see, her first steps. He saw from behind the counter, and I'd have to make sure she was back enough so that he could see her take one step, first words, everything. My daughter had a comfort blanket, and it went everywhere. It still goes everywhere now today, and that was very hard to tell her that has to go into the locker. So not alone could she not go in and touch her dad, but she couldn't take her toy that she takes everywhere with her either. So I remember one time myself and Lisa telling the kids that their dad worked with radioactive stuff, and that's why they couldn't touch them. So I suppose we were clever enough to come up with that, but long term that's not sustainable. He stayed in Cork for maybe a year, and it was just too hard because the visits were getting harder every time. She just really wanted to go over, she wanted to hold her dad, she wanted to hug her dad. So one day she decided to beat the system, and she ran to the end of the corridor, or end of the visiting room, and she snuck onto the prison guard's leg, and she ran up the back, and she ended up with her dad. But Dad had to pick her up like an object and pass her back over because he was afraid of the consequences of doing so. So after much talks, we decided to travel into another prison would be better because they'd have contact. So he went to the training unit. The visits there were fantastic. We had our own room, but in order for me to go there and have enough time, because the visits were only a half an hour, I would have to leave home at 6:30 in the morning. So I'd have to take my child from her bed in her pyjamas, and we'd have breakfast in the car when we arrived at the training centre. But then we got about an hour and a half visit, which was fantastic. that opportunity. He was able to play with her, he was able to engage with her, it was absolutely fantastic. And but it got, again, too unsustainable. It was costing me a fortune every week to go, so he had to come back to Cork. And my daughter would have been nearly 3 at this stage, and she decided she didn't want to go to Daddy's Yockey work. She didn't like Daddy's Yockey work. She only liked the other work. So there again, you're left with the guilt, the turmoil. It's extremely, extremely hard. As Lisa said, you get a 6 minutes, 4-second phone call every evening. But a baby doesn't want to talk on the phone because she's looking at the phone going, where is he? Where's my dad? Because she can't see him. It's extremely, extremely tough as a parent to have to deal with this. And from my point, when my partner went to prison, he went in that gate one man and he came out a completely different man. Now we're still together, but I'll never get that man back that I had. His defences are always up. He never learned how to be a parent properly, because for the most important part, we're all learning, he was locked behind bars. And that is his own fault. But at the same time, I feel that the justice system failed my daughter, because if there was more things in place, like all the recommendations that I heard today, maybe it would have been different. Now my daughter is 7 and she now asks questions. She still doesn't know that her dad was in prison, and we will tell her this in time, but at the moment I just think she doesn't understand prison, and she thinks it's this awful place because she sees it on Scooby-Doo, and I don't want to put that on her now. However, she's noticed now that Daddy's not in pictures when she was small. Why isn't Daddy there? So Daddy was in work. Daddy worked away, but I think she's putting 2 and 2 together that Daddy didn't work away back then, because now Daddy works away again. Because of being in prison, he found it very, very hard to obtain employment when he came home, and also he really couldn't live in the family unit. He just found it very difficult. Having no contact for 3 years leaves an impact, and when he came home, even then, he loves to get hugs and everything, but it's hard for him. It is very, very hard for him. It's like he has this space, and you nearly have to ask, can you crouch in on that space? Because it's what he was used to. And although he came home to a loving family, he was still institutionalized for not having contact with people and not having proper family visits, having overcrowded visits where you can't hear each other talk, you can't hear it, you're trying to tell maybe private things that have happened, bereavements, anything like that, and you're doing this in a really crowded room where other people's children are nearly climbing on your shoulder to get in to see their dad. It really is horrendous. Going now, we have another child since, and I feel the bond that he has with that child is slightly different to the bond that he has with our daughter. I don't know if it's a positive or a negative, but now he's gone again, so we now have a second child who's being impacted, even though that child wasn't even born when he went to prison first. As a couple, we found it extremely hard to adjust back to each other. I'd been 3 years, I had grown, I had gone back to education, I had been involved in St. Nicholas Trust. I had a life now, and he wasn't part of that life, and it was extremely hard adjusting back to that. And as I said, 5 years on, we are still trying to do that. Prison will always be a part of my life, even though I hope I never again have to see the inside of it as a visitor. But it will always be there. It'll never go away. It'll go away for short periods, but it will crop its head up back again and again and again. It's something that will be with us for life. And maybe had there been parenting programs in the prison when he was there, he might have found it easier to come out and come back into the family, but they weren't there. He received lots of information on release about the welfare that he would be entitled to, and maybe a couple of courses that he could go on, linking him with probation, linking him with Cork Alliance and things like that, which is brilliant, but nothing about how to be a dad. And that is something that you can't just come home and be a dad. That's progressive. You learn that as time goes on, and unfortunately he didn't get that opportunity. So that's my story, and thank you all for listening.